Hello and welcome to the Irish Aesthete. Previously, I was talking about Tyrone House and how in the mid-19th century its owner, Christopher St George, had squandered away much of his inheritance. In mid-March 1912, Violet Martin, one half of the writing partnership of Somerville and Ross, wrote to her cousin and fellow author Edith Somerville, describing a visit she made to Tyrone House. She called it a great square cut stone house of 3 stories with an area perfectly empty and such ceilings, architraves, teak doors and chimney pieces as one sees in old houses in Dublin. It's on a long promontory by the sea, and there rioted 3 or 4 generations of St Georges, living with country women, occasionally marrying them, all illegitimate 4 times over. Not so long ago, 8 of these awful half-peasant families roosted together in that lovely house and fought and barricaded and drank until the police had to intervene. If we only dared to write up that subject. Now, we have to allow for a certain amount of imaginative license in Violet Martin's account of what had taken place in Tyrone House, but at least some of what she said was true. It'll be remembered that Christopher St George had lived at Tyrone House with a local woman, Honoria Kane, with whom he had 10 children before the couple married, and then another 2 afterwards. He'd spent far too much money on horses and other pleasures, and was forced to sell some 2/3 of his estate in the aftermath of the Great Famine of the 1840s. Following his death in 1877, Honoria remained on in the house, but life there was much shrunken from its previous grandeur. The ground floor rooms were all locked up, and at least some of the first floor occupied by one of Christopher and Honoria's illegitimate sons with his own family. Honoria lived on the top floor with her unmarried daughter Matilda and a maid. Since the basement kitchens had all been closed, the food for her was cooked on an open fire in one of the former servants' rooms. Honoria died in 1905, after which the rest of the family moved out of Tyrone House since the expense of keeping it up was too great. A couple of caretakers stayed on, and Matilda St George would sometimes come over to look at the place. When Violet Martin met her there in 1912, she described Matilda, then aged in her 50s, as a strange mixture of distinction and commonness like her breeding, and it was very sad to see her at the door of that great house. 8 years later, the place was gone. In August 1920, a group of IRA supporters, fearing it might be used by the British Army or the police, broke into the house and set it on fire. A report in a local paper described how the house went up in flames and how the life-size statue of Lord St George, which stood in a niche in the entrance hall, was attacked and its head smashed off. All the ceilings are now ruined, the piece concluded, and the mantelpieces also, and the entire structure an empty shell and a ruin. And so it has remained ever since, occasionally pillaged for cut stone and falling further and further into decrepitude. But we can console ourselves that it was responsible for inspiring one of Somerville and Ross's finest novels, The Big House of Inver, published in 1925. According to Edith Somerville, the book concerns the history of one of those minor dynasties that in Ireland have risen and rules and rioted and crashed in ruins. In other words, just like the St George's of Tyrone House. And if you want to learn more about both the family and the building, you can do so in this work, written by an author who may be familiar to some of you. Thank you so much for watching The Irish Aesthete. I look forward to seeing you again next week. Goodbye.